The unexpected return. The hum of the airplane engines was a familiar sound to me by now. I had spent countless hours on planes, traveling for work, meeting clients, and ticking off tasks on an ever-growing to-do list. But today, the low hum felt different. It felt like the soundtrack to something important. After months of business trips, of living out of a suitcase, and constantly navigating the demands of work, I was finally on my way back home. And not just any home. California. My mother's home. I had always loved the feeling of returning to her house. There was something about it. The way the air felt warmer, the way the house seemed to welcome you back with the smells of home-cooked meals, and the promise of a comforting routine. It was the place where everything seemed to make sense, no matter how chaotic the outside world got. But this time, something felt even more special. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt a wave of anticipation surge through me as the plane began its descent into California. My name is Oscar, 27, still figuring out life, and how to balance my personal and professional aspirations. But one thing I never lost sight of was my family. My mom had always been there for me, a constant source of strength and support. She taught me early on that family comes first, no matter where life took you. So when I got the call from her a week before, saying she was throwing a small dinner to mark my return, I knew it wasn't just about food. It was her way of saying, "I'm proud of you, and I'm glad you're home." I smiled to myself as I exited the airport, feeling a surge of warmth in my chest. This trip back was different. It was more than just a brief visit. It felt like a fresh start. It had been a long, exhausting stretch of traveling. But now, I was ready to reconnect. As I slid into the back seat of the cab, I watched the familiar streets of my hometown whiz past. The nostalgia hit me immediately. Everything felt just as I remembered. But somehow, there was this electric sense of change in the air. Arriving at my mom's house was like stepping into a safe haven. The house was just as cozy and inviting as it always had been. The windows were thrown open to let in the cool California breeze and the smell of something delicious, likely roasted chicken or fresh bread, filled the air. The house seemed to embrace me, like it was telling me, "You're back. Everything's going to be okay." "Mom." I called out as I pushed open the front door. The familiar sound of her humming reached my ears from the kitchen, and a wave of comfort washed over me. She had always done that. Hummed to herself as she worked, filling the house with an infectious, cheerful energy. I loved that about her. No matter what was going on in life, she always seemed to find joy in the simple things. As I stepped further into the house, I saw her round the corner from the kitchen, a wide smile on her face when she saw me. Her gray hair was tied up in a messy bun, and there was a touch of age on her face, but she still carried the same strength and warmth I'd known all my life. My mom had always been a force of nature, strong, resilient, and endlessly loving. "Oscar," she exclaimed, her arms opening wide as she rushed toward me. "You're finally home. I've missed you so much." She wrapped me in a tight hug, and for a moment I forgot everything else. I forgot the stresses of work, the fatigue from travel, and the weight of life's demands. It felt good to just stand there, holding her, feeling the love that had always been constant in my life. "I missed you too, Mom," I said softly, my voice a little choked. It had been a while since I'd had one of these moments with her. She pulled back and looked me over, as if inspecting me for any signs of wear and tear. "You look tired," she said with a smirk. "Too much work." I nodded. "Yeah, but I'm glad to be here now. It's like a weight's been lifted." She laughed, leading me into the dining room where the dinner table was set. The room was beautifully arranged, soft lighting, a few candles, and a spread of delicious food that made my stomach growl. But something about the scene didn't sit right with me. There was an extra plate at the table, one that wasn't supposed to be there. "Mom, what's all this?" I asked, raising an eyebrow at the place setting. "I thought this was just for you and me." She paused, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "Well, "It's just us tonight, of course," she said, but her eyes twinkled mischievously. "But I thought someone else might like to join us." Before I could question further, the doorbell rang. I went to answer it, expecting to see one of the neighbors or maybe a delivery person, but when I opened the door, I was taken aback. There, standing in front of me, was Kate. Kate had always been a regular part of our family's life. She was my mom's best friend, but I hadn't seen her in months. She looked a little different than I remembered. More polished, maybe. Still, her natural elegance and self-assuredness made her stand out, even in the simplest of outfits. "Hey, Kate," I said, giving her a warm smile. "It's great to see you." I stepped aside to let her in, still processing the surprise of her arrival. She raised an eyebrow as she stepped into the house, her eyes scanning the room. "Oscar. Wow, I didn't expect to see you tonight," she said, her tone a mix of surprise and warmth. "I was just stopping by to say hi to your mom, but I didn't know she was having dinner for you." I blinked, still a little off guard. "You didn't know I was coming back?" Kate shook her head, a smile tugging at her lips. "No, I had no idea. I just thought I'd stop by for a quick cup of coffee with your mom." "Well, you're welcome to join us for dinner then," I said quickly, gesturing to the dining room. "We're just about to sit down." She chuckled, but there was a hint of hesitation in her eyes. It wasn't that Kate was uncomfortable, quite the opposite, in fact. She had this effortless way of blending into any environment, making everyone around her feel at ease. But even so, I could tell she hadn't planned on staying for dinner. She had come over for a simple visit, and now here she was, joining us for a full meal. As we sat down, I couldn't help but notice how easily she slipped into the conversation. My mom and Kate had a bond I'd always admired, one that was built on years of friendship and shared experiences. It was clear that they were more than just friends. They were family. And despite the unexpected change of plans, Kate seemed to fit perfectly into the evening. The air between us felt relaxed, even though I couldn't ignore the fact that my presence had caused a shift in the dynamic. There was something about Kate's confidence, her ease, that drew me in. Little did I know, that night would turn out to be far more significant than just a simple family dinner. A moment that changed everything. The dinner went on as usual. My mom and Kate exchanged stories and laughter, and I slipped into the familiar rhythm of family conversations. But despite the warmth of the evening, something about Kate kept drawing me in. Maybe it was her ability to seamlessly fit into the room, despite being an unplanned guest, or maybe it was the way she looked at life with such refreshing openness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was subtly shifting in the air between us. The wine was flowing, the food was plentiful, and I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of nostalgia. The comforting feeling of home was something I had missed so much during my months away. But there was an undercurrent of curiosity inside me that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about coming home anymore. It was about something bigger, something unspoken that hovered around Kate's presence. As the evening wore on, we started to reminisce about old memories. My mom and Kate shared funny stories from when I was younger, and there was this warmth between them that filled the room with light. It was easy, familiar, like a safe haven I could always return to. But with Kate there, something about the evening felt different, and I couldn't put my finger on it. At one point, the conversation shifted to something more personal. We were talking about our recent experiences, what we'd been up to, how life had changed. And I found myself paying more attention to Kate's every word. She wasn't just a guest at the table anymore. She was someone who seemed to understand life in a way that made you want to listen, made you want to learn. I noticed her laugh. It wasn't just a polite chuckle, but a deep, genuine laugh that seemed to resonate with the very core of who she was. Her eyes sparkled with a kind of authenticity that I hadn't seen in a long time. It wasn't the kind of laugh that tried to hide anything. It was a laugh that embraced life fully, a laugh that made everyone around her feel welcome and at ease. I couldn't remember the last time I had heard someone laugh like that. It felt real. The night was unfolding just like any other dinner. I was enjoying the food, the stories, the comfort of being home. But there was something about Kate's presence that was starting to feel more significant. It wasn't just the way she carried herself, it was the quiet confidence she exuded. The way she could command attention without needing to try. I had met plenty of people in my life, but Kate felt different. Then, as I reached for another bottle of wine to open, disaster struck. My elbow brushed against Kate's glass, sending it toppling over the edge of the table. Time seemed to slow down as I watched the red liquid spill in an arc, landing on her skirt with an unceremonious splash. "Oh no," I said, my heart sinking, my face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Kate. I didn't mean to." Kate froze for a moment, and I could feel the tension rise in the room. My eyes darted between my mom and Kate, my mind frantically searching for the right thing to say. But then, to my surprise, Kate burst into laughter. It wasn't mocking or harsh. It was genuine, that same laugh I had noticed earlier, and it instantly made me feel a little less mortified. "It's really okay, Oscar," she said, her eyes glinting with amusement. "It's just wine. Don't worry about it." I was still mortified, but her calmness helped to settle my nerves. It felt like a relief, though I couldn't help but continue apologizing as I grabbed some napkins to try to salvage the situation. "No, seriously, it's fine," she repeated, giving me a playful look. "I've had worse happen. Trust me." Her easygoing nature had a way of putting everyone at ease. The room shifted back to its previous lightheartedness, but in my mind, I couldn't help but replay the incident. There I was, embarrassing myself in front of my mom's best friend. It wasn't exactly the grand return I had imagined, but somehow, Kate's grace in handling the situation made me feel like everything was going to be okay. The rest of the evening passed without incident, though I found it hard to focus on the conversation. Every time Kate spoke, it felt like she was saying something more profound than she realized. She spoke with a quiet wisdom, the kind that could only come from someone who had experienced life in its full spectrum. I could tell that there was more to her story than met the eye, and that intrigued me even more. By the time the evening wound down and Kate said her goodbyes, I was left feeling conflicted. I wasn't sure what had just happened, but I knew that something had changed. There was this subtle connection that I couldn't ignore, this pull between us that had surfaced in the most unexpected way. As Kate left, she waved at me with a smile. "It was great meeting you, Oscar," she said, her voice light and friendly. "And don't worry about the wine. Really. I'll see you soon." I watched her disappear into the night, and as the door closed behind her, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another ordinary evening. Something had shifted. But what? The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. It was a familiar scent that instantly grounded me. I found my mom humming away in the kitchen, the same hum I had grown up with, the sound that always brought comfort. There was something so simple yet so powerful about it. I sat down at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee as I thought back to last night. "Morning, Mom," I said, trying to sound casual as I tried to process the events of the previous night. "Morning, Oscar," she replied, glancing at me with a warm smile. "Did you sleep well?" "Yeah," I said, taking another sip of my coffee. "Last night was nice. Unexpected, but nice." Mom continued stirring the oatmeal on the stove, her back turned to me. "It was good having you home again. And I'm glad Kate stopped by. It's been a while since I've seen her." I raised an eyebrow, trying to mask my curiosity. "So, how do you know Kate? She seems interesting." My mom turned around and smiled knowingly. "Oh, Kate's been a part of my life for a long time. We worked together at the clinic, and she's been a great friend. She's been through some tough times, you know. Moved here to start fresh after going through a lot. But she's always been strong. You'd like her." The mention of Kate's past piqued my interest. I'd sensed there was something more to her, but I hadn't expected my mom to give me a glimpse into her story. She didn't elaborate much, but I could tell there was a depth to Kate that I hadn't seen before. She was more than just the confident, carefree woman I had seen last night. There was a resilience there, a quiet strength that made me want to know more. Later that afternoon, I decided to head into town. The small California town my mom lived in had a charm that never failed to put me at ease. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, and the slow pace of life made it feel like time moved a little more deliberately. As I walked through the main street, the thought of Kate lingered in my mind. I hadn't expected to see her again so soon, but fate had other plans. As I walked past the coffee shop, I heard a familiar voice call my name. I turned to see Kate sitting outside at one of the tables, a book in her hand and a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked up as I approached, a soft smile lighting up her face. "Oscar," she exclaimed, a hint of surprise in her voice. "What are you doing here?" I smiled, trying to act casual. "Just running some errands. What about you? Is this your usual spot?" She nodded, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Pretty much. I like coming here when I have a day off. It's peaceful." I sat down, feeling a bit awkward but also strangely comfortable. "Reading anything interesting?" I asked, nodding toward the book in her hand. "Just a mystery novel," she replied, holding it up for me to see. "Nothing fancy." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The noise of the town filled the air around us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that was easy to be in, the kind that made you feel like you could just exist in each other's company without the need for constant chatter. I found myself stealing glances at Kate, wondering if this quiet connection was just a fleeting moment or something deeper. "So," she said, breaking the silence, "have you recovered from the wine disaster?" I chuckled, shaking my head. "Barely. I'm still embarrassed about that." Kate waved it off with a smile. Honestly, it made the night more memorable, in a "this guy's a klutz" kind of way. I laughed, but there was something in her smile, something in the way she looked at me, that made me feel like there was more to this conversation than just casual banter. What was it about her? Why did I feel so drawn to her? "I'm glad you didn't mind," I said softly. "Really, I feel terrible about it." She smiled, her eyes meeting mine with a warmth that made my heart skip a beat. "It's fine, Oscar. It happens." For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was connecting with someone. And not just anyone, Kate. There was something there, something I couldn't ignore. And as the conversation continued, I found myself hoping that this was just the beginning. Maybe, just maybe, we had something real here. Unspoken bonds. The next few days felt like they were suspended in time. The world moved around me, but everything seemed to slow down when I thought about Kate. After our impromptu coffee at the cafe, I couldn't seem to shake the way she made me feel. There was an undeniable connection, something more than simple friendship, yet it was too new, too raw for me to fully understand. All I knew was that every time I thought about her, a mixture of curiosity and something deeper stirred inside me. It was like she had planted a seed in my mind, and now it was growing, slowly but surely. That morning, as I sat in the kitchen with my coffee, the usual hum of my mom preparing breakfast filled the air, but my mind was elsewhere. The house was warm, the sun shining through the kitchen window, but I could feel a slight unease in my chest as I tried to focus on the conversation with my mom. She had always been the grounding force in my life, the person I turned to for advice, but today, I found myself distracted. "So, Kate and I are meeting for lunch on Saturday," my mom said, casually stirring her oatmeal. "It's been a while since we've caught up. She's a good friend, you know." I paused mid-sip of my coffee, my heart racing a little. "Kate?" I asked, trying to sound indifferent, though I could feel the tension rising in my body. "What about her?" Mom turned to me, her eyes narrowing slightly with a knowing expression. "You've been spending a lot of time thinking about Kate lately, haven't you?" she asked, a teasing tone in her voice. I choked on my coffee. "What? No. I mean, maybe." I stammered, trying to hide my sudden nervousness. I noticed she's been through a lot, that's all." "You said she moved here for a fresh start." My mom raised an eyebrow. Oscar, if you're trying to hide something, you're not doing a great job of it. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. I'm not hiding anything, Mom, I replied, my voice sounding a little too defensive. I'm just curious about her story, that's all. Mom gave me a long, appraising look. Well, if you're interested in her, maybe you should tell her. Kate doesn't exactly make the first move. She's been through enough to know what she wants, but she's also very careful with her heart. Her words hung in the air between us. I knew my mom was trying to be subtle, but the underlying message was clear. If I was interested in Kate, I needed to make it known. The thought of it made my stomach twist in knots. I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. Still, I couldn't deny that something inside me wanted to take that leap, to tell Kate how I felt, to explore whatever this connection between us was. But there was so much I didn't know about her, so many things I had yet to understand. Saturday arrived with an unexpected sense of anticipation. I had tried to distract myself with errands and chores, but I found my mind constantly drifting back to Kate. My mom had mentioned casually that they would be having lunch at the little Italian restaurant downtown, a place I knew well, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something would happen today. Something that would change everything. I spent a little extra time getting dressed that morning, which was a rarity. Usually, I didn't care much about how I looked when I went out, but today felt different. I found myself smoothing my shirt, adjusting my collar, and making sure my hair was in place. It was ridiculous, I knew that, but there was this nagging feeling that today might be important. When I arrived at the restaurant, I spotted Kate immediately. She was sitting by the window, a book in her hands, looking every bit as effortless as I remembered her. She looked up as we walked in, and her eyes lit up when she saw me, a warm smile spreading across her face. I could feel my heart skip a beat. "Oscar," she said, rising to greet me. "I didn't know you'd be joining us today. It's great to see you." I returned her smile, trying to mask the nervous energy swirling inside me. "Mom insisted," I replied, glancing over at her. My mom was already seated, sipping a glass of water, looking completely at ease in her element. Kate gestured to the chair across from her. "Well, I'm glad you came. It's always nice to catch up with old friends, especially when it's been too long." As I took my seat, I couldn't help but notice how natural she looked in this setting. It wasn't just the way she carried herself, but the way she seemed to make the space around her feel more inviting. She had this magnetic aura about her that drew people in without effort, and I found myself unable to look away. The lunch began with light conversation. My mom and Kate were deep in discussion about work, sharing funny anecdotes and stories from the clinic where they both worked. Kate was so easygoing, effortlessly slipping in and out of the conversation, but every now and then, I caught myself stealing glances at her. The way she laughed, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke, everything about her seemed to captivate me. At one point, my mom excused herself to take a phone call, leaving Kate and me alone at the table. I didn't know what to say at first. The silence was comfortable, but there was an undeniable tension between us, one that I didn't want to ignore. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "So how's it been settling back here?" Kate asked, breaking the silence. "Is it weird, being home after so long?" I nodded, considering her question. "It's definitely an adjustment. I thought coming back here would be temporary, just a pit stop before heading back to the grind. But now I'm not so sure. It feels different. Like I'm finally slowing down." Kate looked at me thoughtfully, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. "I get that. I moved here for a fresh start too, after everything that happened in my life. It wasn't easy, but sometimes you need to hit the reset button." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? What happened?" I asked cautiously, not wanting to pry, but genuinely curious. She hesitated for a moment, her gaze drifting to the window as if she were searching for the right words. "It's not an easy story to tell," she said softly. "But I needed to leave my old life behind, you know. I needed to be somewhere I could breathe, where I could rebuild myself without all the noise." I didn't press her further, but her words lingered in the air between us. There was a depth to Kate that I hadn't realized before, a quiet strength that radiated from her despite the vulnerability she had just shared. It made me admire her even more, though it also left me with 1,000 questions. What had happened? What was she running from? But before I could ask anything more, my mom returned, and the conversation shifted back to lighter topics. Still, the connection between Kate and me had deepened in that brief exchange. I could feel it. A shift, an unspoken understanding between us that wasn't there before. Something had changed, and I wasn't sure where it would lead. As the lunch came to a close, I felt a strange sense of anticipation, as though we were all on the cusp of something new, something important. Kate and I exchanged a few more pleasantries before she stood to leave, her smile soft but genuine. "It was really nice having lunch with you, Oscar," she said, her voice warm. "I'm glad you joined us." "Yeah, it was great," I replied, my voice feeling a little unsteady. "Maybe we can do it again sometime." She nodded, her eyes locking with mine for a brief moment, and I saw something flicker in them. Something I couldn't quite name but knew was there. "Maybe," she said with a smile. "See you soon, Oscar." As she walked away, I found myself standing there, staring after her, my mind racing with the possibilities of what could be. Was this connection real? Was there something more between us than just casual friendship? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't ignore this feeling. Whatever this was, it was just beginning. Crossing boundaries. The days that followed were a blur of ordinary life. I kept busy with small tasks and spent time with my mom, trying to get back into the swing of things. But despite the normalcy, my thoughts constantly drifted back to Kate. Her presence lingered in my mind like a soft, insistent whisper. Even though we hadn't spoken much since lunch, the connection we had started to build felt real. Too real to ignore. It was the kind of thing that gnawed at you quietly, urging you to make sense of it before it slipped away. I found myself thinking about her more than I cared to admit. I couldn't help it. There was something magnetic about her. The way she spoke, the way she carried herself, and the way she seemed to understand life with such grace. It all intrigued me. There was a depth to her that felt almost unreachable, but every time we spoke, I felt a little closer to understanding her. One evening after dinner, I decided to take a walk to clear my mind. I'd been spending a lot of time in my mom's house, and though I loved it, the space felt a little too familiar, a little too still. My mind needed movement. As I walked down the quiet streets, the fading light of the day casting long shadows across the pavement, I realized just how much I missed the feeling of being alone with my thoughts. There was a certain peace in solitude, but today, the peace felt different. It felt like it was pushing me toward something. I passed the little bookstore in town, the one that I often visited as a kid, and to my surprise, I saw Kate walking out of the shop, a paper bag in hand, her head tilted as if she were thinking about something. She looked up when she noticed me, a smile spreading across her face when she recognized me. "Oscar," she greeted, her voice warm and welcoming. There was no trace of hesitation in her tone. It was as if we had known each other for years, despite the fact that we hadn't really spent much time together. I stopped in my tracks, unsure whether to keep walking or to stay and talk. A part of me wanted to turn around and pretend I hadn't seen her, but another part, the part that had been quietly hoping for this moment, urged me to stay. I had to be honest with myself. I wanted to see her again. I wanted to explore whatever this was between us. "Hey, Kate," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I walked toward her. "What are you up to?" She laughed softly, looking down at the paper bag in her hands. "Just picking up a few things." "You know, the usual," she replied, her tone light, but there was an underlying depth in her voice that I couldn't ignore. I could sense that something was on her mind. "Are you busy?" I asked, the question slipping out before I had time to think. "I mean, I don't want to keep you, but I was just going for a walk. Thought I'd see if you wanted to join me." Kate's expression softened, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes. She didn't hesitate, though. "I'd like that," she said with a small smile. "It's nice to get out of the house once in a while. Let me just drop these off, and I'll meet you in a few minutes." I nodded, my heart racing a little. The fact that she agreed so easily made me feel a sense of excitement, but it also made me nervous. What was happening between us? Was this just a friendly walk, or was there something more? I didn't know, but the pull I felt toward her was undeniable. A few minutes later, Kate joined me, her hair flowing loosely around her shoulders, her expression relaxed. We began walking down the familiar streets of the small town, the air cool and crisp as the evening sun dipped lower into the horizon. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes, comforting, yet heavy with the weight of unspoken words. "So, how's everything been going?" she asked as we walked side by side, her hands tucked into the pockets of her jacket. There was a genuine curiosity in her voice, as if she was eager to know what was going on in my life beyond the surface. I shrugged slightly, looking ahead at the quiet streets. "It's been good. I mean, I've been back for a few weeks now, and I'm adjusting. Things are slowing down. It feels good to be home." She nodded, her gaze shifting to the trees that lined the sidewalk. "I get that," she said softly. "When I moved here, it was like I could finally breathe again. Like I was taking back control of my life, you know. Starting over is scary, but it's also freeing." I glanced at her, intrigued by her words. "What made you decide to leave everything behind?" I asked, genuinely curious. "I mean, you've got a fresh start here, but there must have been something that pushed you to make that change." Kate paused for a moment, her expression shifting ever so slightly, as if she were choosing her words carefully. She stopped walking, and I did the same, giving her the space she seemed to need. "It's not a simple story," she said quietly, her gaze downcast for a moment. "But I needed to leave my past behind. There were things I had to let go of, people I had to walk away from. And when I came here, it was like the slate was wiped clean. I could finally be myself without the weight of all the old stuff dragging me down." Her honesty struck me like a wave. There was a rawness to her words that made me feel like I was glimpsing a part of her that she didn't share with just anyone. I wanted to ask more, to dig deeper into what had happened, but I sensed that pushing her would only push her away. So I stayed silent, just standing there with her, letting her words hang in the air. "I admire that," I said softly, meeting her gaze. "Being able to walk away from something and rebuild your life, it takes a lot of strength." Kate's lips curved into a small, appreciative smile. "It's not always easy, but I've learned to trust that things happen for a reason. I've learned to trust myself more." There was a long silence between us then, and for a moment, it felt like we were both lost in our own thoughts. I wasn't sure what was going on between us, but the more we spoke, the more I realized that we were sharing pieces of ourselves that we hadn't shared with anyone else. And somehow, in the midst of it all, it felt like we were opening up to each other in ways that went beyond simple conversation. "Have you ever thought about starting over?" Kate asked, breaking the silence, her voice softer now, almost tentative. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. "Starting over?" I repeated. "I don't know. I've always tried to keep moving forward, you know. But I guess I've never really thought about what it would mean to start fresh, to leave everything behind and do something different." Kate nodded thoughtfully. "It's not easy, but sometimes starting over is the only way to really live. It's not about running away from the past. It's about choosing to create something new for yourself. You can't move forward if you're constantly looking back." Her words lingered in my mind as we continued walking, the sound of our footsteps, the only noise between us. I couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to start over. If I could leave behind the pressures of my career, the weight of expectations, and just do what felt right for me. We walked in companionable silence for a while longer, each of us lost in our thoughts, but the connection between us was undeniable. It was like we were both reaching for something we couldn't fully explain, something we weren't ready to define, but whatever it was, it felt like it had the potential to change everything. As we reached the park at the edge of town, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in shades of pink and orange. We stopped by the fountain, both of us taking in the beauty of the evening. Kate stood beside me, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset, her expression thoughtful. "This place is nice," she said softly. "I come here sometimes to clear my head." I nodded. "Yeah, I've always liked it here. It's peaceful." We stood there for a moment, the world around us still and quiet. And in that stillness, I felt like we were both on the edge of something we couldn't quite name. A connection, an understanding, something deeper than either of us had expected. "I'm glad you asked me to walk with you," Kate said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to look at her, and our eyes met. For the first time, I felt like I was seeing her for who she truly was. Someone strong, yet vulnerable. Someone who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just walking beside her. I was walking towards something new, something that had the potential to change everything. A shift in the air. The following days felt like they were slipping through my fingers, each one a fleeting moment I couldn't hold on to. The small town that had once seemed so familiar now felt different, like it was brimming with potential and unspoken possibilities. My thoughts, which once lingered on the routine of work, now seemed to be consumed by the moments I had spent with Kate. Our walk in the park, the quiet understanding that passed between us. It was something that lingered in my mind, like a song that plays on repeat long after the music has stopped. That evening, I sat on the porch of my mom's house, watching the sky stretch out in shades of purple and orange as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was one of those rare moments when everything felt perfectly still. My mom was inside, humming softly to herself as she prepared dinner, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel the weight of everything that had happened in the past few weeks. The return to California, reconnecting with my mom, and most notably, the connection that had begun to form with Kate. It had been an odd few days since our walk in the park. I found myself looking for her everywhere I went, wondering if our paths would cross again. There was a part of me that wanted to pick up where we had left off, to dive deeper into whatever this was between us. But I hesitated. I wasn't sure if she felt the same way. We hadn't really discussed what had happened during our walk, nor had we mentioned the quiet pull between us. It hung there, unspoken but undeniable. I sighed, letting my head rest against the back of the chair. The cool breeze ruffled my hair, and for a moment, I let myself drift. It was almost as though I could sense the shift in the air, something subtle but powerful, like the calm before a storm, but in the most peaceful, exhilarating way possible. The next morning, as I made my way downstairs to the kitchen, I found my mom already sitting at the table, a cup of coffee in hand. The aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the scent of something baking, and I couldn't help but smile. This was the comfort I had missed, the simplicity of home. "Good morning, Mom," I said, grabbing a mug and pouring myself a cup of coffee. I took a sip, the warmth spreading through me, grounding me in the moment. "Morning, Oscar," she replied, looking up from the newspaper. She gave me a knowing smile, her eyes glinting with that familiar spark of mischief. "So, how's everything going with Kate?" My heart skipped a beat, and I nearly choked on my coffee. "Kate?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice gave me away. She chuckled, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Don't try to act like I haven't noticed. I'm not blind, Oscar. You've been spending a lot of time thinking about her, haven't you?" I could feel the heat rush to my face. "It's not like that, Mom," I stammered, but I knew she saw right through me. "We've just been talking, catching up." "Oh," she said, a teasing tone in her voice. "I can see the way you look at her, Oscar. You don't need to hide it from me. I'm happy for you, but you've got to be careful. Kate's been through a lot, and she's not someone who just opens up easily." Her words hung in the air, and I found myself wondering if I should take them to heart. My mom was right. Kate had been through something that made her cautious, and I didn't want to rush things. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the way I felt when I was around her. It wasn't just a passing attraction. It was deeper, more real than anything I had experienced in a long time. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, my voice softening. "But I can't help it, Mom. There's something about her. I don't know what it is yet, but I can't ignore it." My mom smiled, her expression more serious now. "You don't have to have all the answers right away. Just take it slow. Let things unfold naturally. Sometimes the best things come when you least expect them." Later that day, I found myself walking through town, the air still crisp from the morning fog. I needed some fresh air, some space to think about everything my mom had said. As I passed by the bookstore again, I saw Kate sitting outside, a book in her lap and a cup of coffee resting beside her. She looked so at ease, so comfortable in her own skin, and I found myself drawn to her yet again. "Hey," I said as I approached, unable to keep the smile from my face. "Mind if I join you?" Kate looked up, her expression lighting up when she saw me. "Oscar, hey," she said, her voice warm and inviting. Of course, I was just enjoying the sunshine. "It's nice out today." I sat down across from her, feeling the familiar sense of ease settle over me as we exchanged pleasantries. We fell into a comfortable rhythm, talking about everything and nothing. Books, the weather, random observations about life. And yet, as the conversation continued, I couldn't help but notice how effortlessly we were slipping into a deeper connection. Kate, for all her confidence, had a way of revealing glimpses of her vulnerability that made me want to know more. It was in the way she paused before answering certain questions, as though she was deciding how much to share. It was in the way her eyes softened when she spoke about her past, the way she carried the weight of her experiences without letting them define her. I found myself wanting to ask more, to understand the person behind that soft smile, the woman who had rebuilt her life from the ground up. But instead of pushing, I let the conversation unfold naturally. There would be time for that later, I hoped. After a while, Kate closed her book and looked at me, her gaze steady and thoughtful. "Oscar," she said, her voice a little quieter now. "I've been thinking about something. About us." I felt my heart rate increase. My mind raced, wondering if she was about to say something that would change everything. Kate continued, her words carefully chosen. "I think there's something between us, something that's hard to define, but it's there. I don't know what it means yet, but I don't want to ignore it." Her honesty left me momentarily speechless. I felt a surge of relief wash over me, mixed with an overwhelming sense of hope. I wasn't the only one who felt this pull. Kate felt it too. "I'm glad you said that," I finally managed to say, my voice steady despite the excitement bubbling inside me. "I've been feeling the same way. It's like there's something between us, something I don't quite understand yet, but I don't want to let it go." Kate smiled, a soft, almost shy smile, and I felt my heart soften. "Maybe we don't have to understand it all right now," she said. "Maybe we just need to see where it takes us." In that moment, everything seemed to shift. The air between us was no longer filled with uncertainty. There was a sense of clarity, of mutual understanding. We didn't need all the answers. We just needed to take the next step together. As we sat there in the fading light of the afternoon, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the best connections are the ones that sneak up on you when you least expect them. And though I didn't know where this would lead, I was ready to find out. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And with Kate by my side, I knew that whatever came next, I wouldn't have to face it alone. The road ahead, the days that followed felt like an unfolding story, one that neither Kate nor I fully understood, but both of us felt compelled to follow. Our connection was undeniable, but neither of us wanted to rush it. We had talked about it, shared our thoughts and feelings, but it still felt like we were standing at the edge of something unknown, something that could change the course of both our lives. And yet, despite the uncertainty, it also felt like we were taking the first steps into something beautiful. I spent more time with Kate in the days that followed, but each meeting seemed to deepen the mystery of what was growing between us. We would meet for coffee, walk through the park, or simply sit on benches by the fountain, talking about everything and nothing. We exchanged stories about our childhoods, our dreams, the things that scared us, and the things we had yet to conquer. It was refreshing, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of connection as we shared those moments. Every conversation seemed to reveal something new, something more profound than I expected. One evening, a week after we had spoken so openly about the pull between us, Kate invited me over to her place for dinner. I had never been to her house before, but the invitation felt natural, like it was the next step in whatever was beginning to unfold between us. I had spent enough time with her to know that she was someone who valued space and independence, and I respected that. So when she asked me over, I knew it was her way of inviting me into her world. As I drove to her house that evening, my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. There was a part of me that was excited, eager to see where this would go. But there was also a quiet sense of nerves, the kind you get when you're about to step into a space that's unknown, where the stakes feel higher than they actually are. I parked my car outside her house, a small, charming cottage at the edge of town. The lights inside were warm, glowing through the windows like a beacon, inviting me in. When Kate opened the door, her smile was soft and welcoming, but I could tell she was nervous too. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, as if trying to understand what this evening meant for both of us. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but with a hint of vulnerability. "Hi," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I'm glad you could come." "I wouldn't have missed it," I replied, my voice light, but my heart beating faster than usual. As I stepped inside, I was struck by the simplicity and warmth of her home. It was cozy, lived in, with a sense of comfort that felt uniquely Kate. There were books scattered on the coffee table, a few plants in the corners of the room, and the faint scent of something delicious wafting from the kitchen. Kate led me to the dining table, where a homemade meal awaited us. It wasn't anything fancy, just pasta and a simple salad, but there was something about the way it was laid out that made the meal feel like an experience, not just a meal. I couldn't help but notice how her home mirrored the way she carried herself, warm, unassuming, and genuine. As we sat down to eat, I realized just how much I had come to enjoy our time together. There was something about Kate, something that made everything feel easier, like being in her presence erased the noise of the world. We spoke about everything, from trivial daily occurrences to more serious topics, like our aspirations and the things we were still trying to figure out about life. There was a fluidity to our conversation, a dance of words that felt effortless and yet profoundly meaningful. At one point, as we were clearing the dishes, Kate glanced over at me, her eyes searching mine. "You know," she said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, about not needing to have all the answers." I nodded, sensing the gravity of the conversation shifting. "Yeah, I meant that. We don't need to figure everything out right away. Sometimes, just living in the moment is enough." She smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "I used to believe that," she said, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "But there's still so much I haven't figured out, so much I haven't let go of." I could feel the weight of her words settle between us, and for the first time, I realized just how much Kate had been holding back. She was strong, resilient, but there was a quiet pain beneath it all, something she hadn't fully shared with anyone. I wanted to help, to ease whatever burden she was carrying, but I knew that wouldn't happen overnight. We had to take it one step at a time, at our own pace. "I get that," I said gently, my heart going out to her. "I think we're all carrying something, even if we don't always show it. But you don't have to face it alone. If you want to talk, I'm here. We can figure it out together." Kate looked at me, her expression softening, and I saw the faintest flicker of relief in her eyes. For a moment, it was as if the walls she had carefully built around herself were starting to crumble, just a little. I could feel the shift, the subtle opening between us, and I knew that this was the moment where things were changing. This wasn't just about a connection anymore. It was about trust, vulnerability, and the willingness to share parts of ourselves that we had hidden away for too long. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, Kate walked me to the door. We stood there for a moment, the quiet of the night settling around us. The world outside felt distant, and in that moment it was just the two of us, standing on the threshold of something new. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice soft and sincere. "I really enjoyed tonight. It's nice to just be real, you know." I smiled, feeling the truth in her words. "Yeah, it was great. I'm glad we could do this, and I'm glad we're talking more." Kate paused for a moment, her gaze dropping to the ground before she looked back up at me. "I don't want to rush things," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I also don't want to run from this, from what we have." I felt my heart skip a beat at her words. She was saying what I had been thinking, but hadn't dared to put into words. There was something between us, something real, and neither of us wanted to ignore it anymore. "I don't want to rush things either," I replied, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I don't want to walk away from this, Kate. I don't want to let it slip away." Kate smiled, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite define. Hope, maybe, or the promise of something more. "Then let's see where it takes us," she said softly. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't help but feel like I was on the brink of something that could change everything. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. Whatever came next, I knew that Kate and I had begun to walk this road together, and that was all that mattered. The road ahead was still unclear, but with Kate by my side, I knew it was a journey worth taking. Whatever challenges we faced, whatever fears we had to confront, we would face them together. And that thought, more than anything, filled me with a sense of peace. The story was far from over, it was just beginning.